Hello and welcome to episode number 44 of the Australian Roundtable Podcast on August the 9th, 2015. I'm your host, John the Bond, and I'm joined in the studio today by our resident wise old elder, the Silver Fox. So I'm introducing you before Ethan this week. How are you, mate?
Yeah, good, thank you. I'm taking advantage of my opportunity to get here. It's good to be with somebody else in the studio.
Yeah, it's much better. Well, down there, much closer towards the Gold Coast, is our old friend Ethan Nash of TOTT News. He joins us live via Google Hangout. And how are you today, Ethan?
Yeah, I'm good, Johnno. It's always a pleasure to be here.
That's the way. Well, let me just read out this little blurb for any new listeners. The ARP is a Brisbane-based independent news analysis discussion roundtable, which broadcasts live every Sunday from about 3 p.m. Live listeners can take part in a live chat forum at the YouTube channel during broadcasts. And there's already a few people there, so hello to all of you. All episodes are archived at that channel and are also available in MP3 format for you to download for free from our website, ausroundtable.com. That's AUSroundtable.com. Views presented by individual panelists and guests are not necessarily representative of the entire panel, and all important information cited during the broadcast will be linked to at our site so you can verify and analyze it for yourself, which we always recommend you do. Episodes generally run for 2 hours, and I'll get to today's rundown right now. We've got a few topics to get through. In domestic, we'll be looking at food companies deceiving consumers, the Commonwealth Bank travel card meltdown, New South Wales Police to get guns in court, police seeking wider powers to tackle the ice epidemic, an update on an accused police officer, and also blood extraction from infants. In international, we're looking at Spain's draconian Gag Laws, scientists admitting that vaccines can increase virus strength, New Zealand health worker fired for refusing vaccinations, an Israeli diplomat who wants to maintain German guilt over the Holocaust, and also Holocaust survivors' grandchildren calling for action over inherited trauma. So we've got another action-packed show today, Lindsay. A lot of these topics are yours.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
And it really is. It does make it better to have you in the studio. It's a lot of fun. Unfortunately, Ethan wasn't able to make it today, but I'm sure it'll be a good episode. You looking forward to
it? Yeah. I like being here, yeah.
Yeah?
Because you can see each other's face and, it's easy to work on.
Of course, last week we had a bit of a live audience, so I kind of miss that element of it. But apart from that, everything's good up here. And Ethan, how are things down there?
Yeah, not too bad, Johnno. Another week, and I'm looking forward to another good show.
That's the way. Well, we might as well get straight into the first segment. Now, we like to take a little look at some of the lighter side of the news. And I noticed this one just this morning. This is from Sky News. Of course, Sky is partly owned by our mate Murdoch, if I'm not mistaken. I could be. I haven't double-checked that one. But anyway, this one's called Shopkeepers Put Vegemite on Watch. And this is from today, Sunday, August 9. And I quote, "Shopkeepers in dry communities in remote Queensland have been told to report any large purchases of Vegemite because it's being used to brew alcohol. The government isn't seeking to place any restrictions on the sale of the famous spread. Addiction of any type is a concern, but communities, especially where alcohol is banned, must work to ensure home brewing of this type does not occur," Indigenous Affairs Minister Nigel Scullion said. Businesses in these communities also have a responsibility to report any purchase that may raise their own suspicions. And quote, so Lindsay, the government's a little bit concerned that people are purchasing too much Vegemite.
Yes, and it's a worry for me. This brings up a whole lot of things. I can understand if you're in a community where alcohol is a real problem, you may want to ban it, and that's a particular thing for them. But in general, what happens if you're somebody of Aboriginal descent and you really don't want to be told what you will or won't do? And it's almost like two rules. That's the thing that gets me. And this comes back to this idea that in the past they've said, oh no, we're all equal. Well, no, we're not all equal, because you're treating them like they're children. They can't. Oh no, you're not allowed to have too much Vegemite because you might brew grog. And anyway, to me, I'd be insulted if they were saying this about me. So I can imagine that there'll be heaps of people there who will be insulted and upset by this. But anyway,
they need to make their minds up.
Yeah.
Are we all the same, or are there some differences, be they cultural or genetic, between different races of people? And once you've made up your mind, are we the same or are we different, then you act accordingly. And they're trying to push the dual narratives of, oh, we're all the same. Anyone who says otherwise is a backwards, dinosaur relic racist. But we're also going to tell shopkeepers in Indigenous communities, just be careful that the abos aren't buying too much Vegemite.
Yeah, that basically sums it up.
Yeah. Ethan, any thoughts?
Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. There's at least a dozen different solutions that have always been overlooked to help these rural communities that are struggling through some of these alcoholic dependency problems and whatnot. But the problem is the government is cutting funding to all of these organizations that can help, and they do it by design. So the government, instead of focusing on cracking down on Vegemite, maybe they should pull their finger out and actually start doing something properly if there is a problem, regardless of whether it's an Indigenous community or not. You know, the next thing that we're going to be seeing on the news is that terrorists have got Vegemite and they're on the loose with it. And you know, where does it end? It's just ridiculous, Johnno.
It is ridiculous. And I guess you could look at it a couple of ways. There is the funny aspect of it. Yeah. Then there is the more serious aspect of look what's going on in this country, where they're telling shopkeepers to watch how much Vegemite people are buying. And they try and tell us that we're the free, lucky ones. We won the war. Democracy won World War II. Lindsay, did you know that?
Yeah, I know.
Freedom,
I heard
liberty.
That. Yeah, I heard that when I was a kid. I heard that.
Yeah, aren't we lucky? And now we've got the police saying shopkeepers just mind they're not buying too much Vegemite. We're going to move into the domestic segment proper. The first topic today is to do with food companies deceiving consumers. Ethan, your article, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Johnno. Now, Lindsay, you brought up a similar story a few weeks ago, and I thought I would include this in the show today after reading a comment response to your original story, Lindsay. And it was something along the lines of no matter who you are, you know, food is a fundamental topic that everyone does care about in some form of another. And, you know, we can use that to communicate on a mass scale. And I thought that was a very true comment that reigns, that is very true that we can use. So I saw this article from goodfood.com.au on August 6th, and I decided to throw it in. It's entitled, Avoiding MSG, Try Memorizing the 129 Terms Food Companies Prefer to Use. Quote, food companies are declaring products have no added MSG despite using ingredients that are ultimately chemically indistinguishable from the flavor enhancer, sparking accusations of misleading labeling. Companies such as Coles, Campbell's, and San Remo are using the claim on foods that contain ingredients such as hydrolyzed vegetable protein and yeast extract, which experts say are chemically the same as MSG. The Food Intolerance Network, made up of 10,200 families in Australia and New Zealand, said not only was the claim often misleading, but companies were using at least 129 different terms and forms of MSG to confuse consumers. Quote, the food industry preys on our ignorance. MSG is monosodium glutamate. There are a lot of ways to break down proteins and release glutamins. Added glutamins then look like an anonymous ingredient in the food, said Howard Dengate, food technologist and co-founder of the group. And then the article goes on to speak about Professor Merlin Thomas, who heads some biochemistry department, who has said that because MSG has a bad reputation, many manufacturers are using other sources to get the favor click. But when dissolved in the water, it is chemically identical to that contained in the enhancers. Now, first of all, I do encourage people, that was the end of the quote, by the way, I do encourage people to look up the dangers of MSG or similar variants that we have seen here. If you're unaware with the flavor enhancer, it will help you grasp just how important this story is. So that's my first point. My second point is, this is quite a distressing number, 129 different terms used to deceive the public about what they're eating. And we've seen this before, gentlemen, with GMO labeling here domestically and especially in the United States, where consumers don't know what they are eating because of loopholes just like this. And ultimately, they should be held accountable. But the supermarket chains, especially the largest, Coles and Woolworths, have a seemingly never-ending impunity when it comes to consumer integrity. I mean, it's wrong, plain and simple. Johnno, I mentioned this on the show before, so I'm interested to get your thoughts on this. But we have descended so far as a society, in my opinion, that people, certainly most people that I observe, don't take a single look at the back of their products. And B, even those that do try to look up and be concerned about their intake and their well-being are being manipulated just like this on a daily basis. It's really something that needs to be discussed a lot more, Johnno, and this story is an example of that.
Well, the way I see it, if people are genuinely concerned about the food that they're eating, they'll be buying foods that wouldn't have MSG or any derivatives or anything similar in the first place. They'll just be buying lots of vegetables and fruit and food that hasn't been particularly processed. And I think for a lot of people, even if they heard the article that you just read out and they fully understood the ramifications of it, if they would still let them go and buy processed foods, then I don't think they're really that concerned about their health. Lindsay, do you get what I'm saying? I mean, I think a lot of people, and I had some pizza. In fact, you brought some pizza today.
Yes.
Yeah, bugger. So sometimes I eat food that I know just isn't good for me. And I think a lot of people, if it's a staple of their diet, the bad food, telling them that it's even worse than they thought it was probably won't change their behavior.
No, I agree with you. And I was just reading somewhere during the week exactly what you've just said. Somebody said, if you buy it in a packet, it's your own fault. That was their basic clue. Just don't buy anything in a packet. Now, I'm sure it goes further than that, but that's pretty much the point they're trying to make, is that you can't tell what's in there. They lie. And you're talking about Coles and Woolworths. There have been a couple of instances I think we brought up in the show where they get fined, but it's only just a tap on the wrist with a feather. And, they've made so many million out of it, they just keep going. I think it might have been the bread we were talking about, was it? I just can't remember. Ethan, can you remember?
It was something along those lines. It did relate.
I think they were claiming it was fresh bread and they were bringing it in pre-baked in from Ireland or something, something like that. So pretty much you can't trust what they do or say. And they probably make so many million out of it, and then they get fined, a couple $100,000 or something. So what do they care? They'll do it again and again and again. So anyway, that's about all I can say on that.
And the people will just keep coming back and buying. And what you're referring to there is, I think this was down in Victoria, where Jeff Kennett, the former premier, had said that he noticed they were advertising that the bread was fresh, but it was actually being brought in, like you said, from Ireland and then just reheated in the oven or whatever.
Yeah.
And they got, like you said, they got fined for it. But what do they care? It's water of a duck's back for them. And if they determine that the risk of getting caught times the penalty of being caught is less than the amount of money they'll make doing something a certain way, then they'll do it. That's business. They'll get away with it, and on life goes. That's not to say that it's not important to talk about the fact that this kind of stuff is getting put in people's foods. I guess when it comes to the people who listen to this kind of show, though, most of them already know that every time they eat bad food, they're doing themselves a disservice. And in the live chat, Brown Snake says, grow your own. And really, if you want to know that what you're eating is halfway healthy, you've got to be growing it yourself. Ethan, what say you?
Yeah, definitely, Johnno. And unfortunately, they're starting to crack down on growing your own food, especially in the United States, But the problem with this story is that even, as I mentioned, even the people that go and try to avoid MSG foods, they're being deceived because they're putting MSG variants in the food and saying that it's MSG free. So people are going and buying MSG free products that have MSG that's indistinguishable from the original content that was used for the enhancer. They're being deceived on a massive level, Johnno, and that's why I really wanted to bring up this article, because, as I said, most people that listen to this show, rather, I can assume that they do look after themselves and whatnot, but the main concern here is that even the people that do try to look out for themselves are also being conned, because they're still getting the food even though it's told that it has no ingredients in it. It really is bad. And if I could have a final thought, it would be a positive one, and it's a reminder of what I said at the start of the article. That is that people care about food in some way or another, and if we use this as a way to just introduce to them that there are vested interests, corporate interests out in the world that are acting against their interests, maybe it could be the catalyst to help them awaken further. And on a fundamental basis, to make conscious decisions, to improve their diet, to improve their health decisions. We vote every day with our purchases. So take care of yourselves and make the right choices, and identify when your food chain is lying to you about ingredients. Be cautious. And at the end of the day, try to do the best thing for your body, because we live in a society, Johnno, that no longer looks out for the health of the people.
Trevor Weir in the live chat says, good work, Ethan. There are a few food additive podcasts on fairdinkumradio.com under the health tab to assist with listeners' research. Thanks for the heads up there, Trevor. I'll provide a link on our site, ausroundtable.com, to the article that you're reading from there, Ethan, and to Fair Dinkum Radio, today's podcast, so people can check those out for themselves. We need to move on to the second topic for domestic, and it's to do with the Commonwealth Bank travel card meltdown, Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you. This was in the Courier Mail, page 6, on the 4th of August, and the headline said, Aussie travellers denied funds in Commonwealth Bank card meltdown. And I'll quote, distressed Australian holidaymakers around the world have been left stranded without cash after their travel money cards failed to work. Travellers began complaining about the issue yesterday and only realised the problem with their cards when they could no longer access their own uploaded funds, end of quote. My reason for bringing this to the table today is to impress upon our listeners just how easily their ordinary funds can be stopped by banks if, or rather when, I think, we experience another banking crisis. And Johnno, you must have feelings on this as well.
Well, the reason why I liked you bringing this one up, because I went through your list of articles this morning, was you made the point that that's how easy it would be if they wanted to shut down people's access to money.
Yeah.
This happened by accident, and all of a sudden, Australians all around the world can't access their money when they're traveling. Well, what do you think they could do if they wanted to shut down people's access to money? I'm not suggesting that they would do that anytime soon, but we know full well that slowly but surely they're propagating in people's mind this idea that, oh, you'd be better off if you had a convenient little implant in your shoulder and your wrist, and you could have everything there. You could have your bank cards there. You could just swipe. We're seeing them slowly put that into people's minds. And there's a reason why they're doing that, because eventually they want people to have their EFTPOS card in their wrist. And then once they do that, then shutting it down is just as simple as this. And this is just one particular example of how they could do it. Ethan, over to you.
Yeah, Johnno, it exemplifies just the dangers of a cashless society right there. You know, a lot of people nowadays are completely dependent on electrical currency, digital currency that doesn't actually exist. Not that the physical form is worth anything anyway, but having a digital currency when everything is controlled by interests that are not in your favor, it's a dangerous thing. And this is a perfect example. You can use this as a discussion to say, to try and bring it up with people. Do you think that this path leads anywhere good? Because, you know, a cashless society does have these vulnerabilities and people are completely dependent on it. And once they do get a cashless society, they'll be able to switch off your income, your currencies. They'll be able to do all of these things. And this is just an example of it. And it's an example of just how dependent people have become on credit cards and how programmed they've been to accept this. And we really need to stay vigilant. I hardly use a credit card at all, you know, only when I have to. I take up my money out of the bank. I have the money on me in its physical form. You know, everything that you can do, avoiding Go cards and all of these smart technologies that are coming in with digital currencies on it, avoiding all of these things are choices that people should make, because this country and New Zealand is specifically, when they try to bring in national ID cards and whatnot, there was people protesting in the streets. Now this digital society has just become normalized, and it's a concern, Johnno.
Yeah, and like I said, the reason why they're putting this notion into people's minds that they'd be better off with, it's more convenient to have this stuff in your wrist, it's not by accident. That is the plan. They're pretty confident they'll be able to enact the plan. And then once, if and when they do, it'll be a matter of time before people either wake up to it and do something about it, or they just go along with it, just like they've gone along with everything else. So nobody seems to notice, nobody seems to care.
Yeah.
We need to move on to the third topic today. New South Wales Police to wear guns in court. Ethan, you've got something for us about this.
Yeah, thanks, Johnno. This is something interesting that I discovered during the week, and I thought that I'd bring it up here on the show. Let me read out an article by the Sydney Morning Herald from August 4th entitled New South Wales Police to wear guns in court. Quote, police will be allowed to take their guns into courthouses under changes announced by the state government on Tuesday. Officers were previously prohibited from wearing or carrying their firearms into court buildings under a directive from New South Wales Chief Magistrate. But under the current terror threat, officers will be able to arm themselves with their full appointment at all times. Deputy Premier and Police Minister Tony Grant said the change in protocol will come into effect next Monday, August 10th. So tomorrow it will be in effect in New South Wales. The change recognises Australia's heightened terrorism alert and the risk posed to police, judicial officers and the community, Mr. Grant said. This is a common sense approach at a time our nation faces a high terror alert and when we've seen police overseas become terror targets themselves, Mr. Grant said. The Police Association of New South Wales has been fighting for the changes for their members to be able to wear and carry firearms in court since September last year, end quote. Now, notice at the end there that they mention that they have been fighting for this since September of last year, despite the terror threat for police being raised in January of this year. So that immediately tells you that this isn't a reflection of safety concerns for police, because the establishment have been pushing this agenda well before the threat was even recognized for police specifically. And the second point is anyone who's ever been to a court building will understand that they employ some of the highest security already. And there's almost an impossibility for an individual to bring anything into the court that would realistically endanger police on the level that they're describing. It's just completely unjustified. And all this is, Lindsay, is another example of how police are becoming more militarized, more armed, and more hostile towards the citizens they serve. And this, even in the time we've done this podcast, is something that has become immensely apparent, especially to me, even by today's standards. So I'll throw it over to you to get your thoughts and anything that you want to expand on.
Okay, thanks for that. Well, look, this interested me because we had something similar in the Courier Mail this week on the 4th of August. And we had our Queensland State Magistrate or Chief Magistrate, and I'll just give you a quick quote from what he had to say. The state's Chief Magistrate has spoken of the new and increasing concern about security, revealing there recently had been threats to burn down the homes of magistrates. Now, that doesn't sound like the sort of terrorism that they've been talking about leading up to this. That sounds like homegrown people with dissatisfaction with the magistrates. That's how I interpret it. But I'll see what you think in a minute. Chief Magistrate Judge Ray Rinaldo said up to 5 magistrates had been threatened during the past year. One person had been charged. He said threats had been made both inside and outside courtrooms. More recently, it's outside of the courtroom in the street and saying that they're going to burn down their houses. And it just goes on in that vein. And he refers to this New South Wales thing. So they both know what's going on. It sounds like it's almost like an Australia-wide thing where people are just getting sick of it. Anyway, to finish it off, I under that article, I put a little comment that these very same concerns are what caused the Peasants' Revolt in 1381. And they exist today. And that is we're overtaxed, and there's an inability to receive true justice from our pretend courts. And I think people are really absolutely getting sick and tired of it. You're being dragged in for all sorts of shonky things that they've passed legislation on, but we can't get justice when things go against us. And I think it's going to get worse. What concerns me with this is that it would appear now that it's not like people like us who've got some sort of an idea of how to behave or whatever in a society. I think they're dealing now with the tearaways who do rob and bash and what have you, and these people are now starting to realise that the courts don't serve them, and you've got to be careful of people like that. Now, have you got any feeling on that first off, Ethan, and then I'll get to see if Johnno's got something to say after you.
Well, I thought it was interesting in the article because I just heard it this morning that there was this connection between New South Wales and Queensland. I only focused on New South Wales until I saw your agenda just before. But the thing that sticks out is the Chief Magistrate in the article says that I'm comfortable with guns in the precinct, but I'm very concerned about guns in a courtroom. And that to me stood out because even a chief magistrate understands that this is unjustified and it's been completely blown out of proportion. And all we're seeing is a militarization of police to a point where it's starting to get almost ridiculous because they're using this broad terminology of terrorism and all of this made up nonsense and fear hysteria. And they're using that to incrementally arm the police more, and especially in a courtroom where it's easy to see that they do not need it. And stories like this are just completely either blown out of proportion. I haven't seen any of the evidence to support any of this. I haven't seen any of the court documents to see these people that are supposedly threatening. Where's all the evidence to show it? Just because they say it, I'm supposed to believe it. And the problem is that people do believe it, and people are just going to get walked all over, John, because the police state is creeping and it's getting larger, and people just don't seem to care because they're programmed not to.
Yeah, I mean, this is one example of the increasing militarization of the police. Of course, we live in a country now in 2015 where it's not an uncommon sight in the newspapers to see the police decked out in their tactical gear because they're raiding this place or that place, and it's presented as being good for us. I would like to think that most people listening to this podcast know better. This particular thing to do with the judges wanting more security in the courts, even though I agree with you, I don't think that they're exactly unsecure as it is. I mean, you have to go through a weapons detection just to get into a courtroom, even if you're just going to sit in the waiting bay or whatever. you have to go through all of that already. So it doesn't seem to me as though the courtrooms aren't secure. Of course, within even a magistrate's court, you've got the police acting as the prosecutor, if you like, in the first place. The one time that I've had to go to court, the fellow acting as the prosecution's person, using very technical terminology to say, but you know what I'm talking about. He was a pretty large gentleman, and I don't think he was going to be messed with by anybody. Plus, they had the main security guy out the front. So it seems to me like they're pretty secure as it is. And maybe, Lindsay, it does have to do with what you're saying, that maybe they're afraid that the way things are going, eventually someone is going to snap and take it out on the legal system.
Yeah. And they were particularly talking about burning their homes down. So this is not the man at work or the woman at work. This is the family. And I think that's what's starting to put the wind up them. And then just recently in the paper, we had this business where this fellow that was killing people related to the family court. So that might be fresh in their minds as well. You know, and they know it can happen. I mean, he just killed a few judges, and suddenly they got to take notice then. What, you know, you start, it's almost like the protocols are talking about that. We don't worry about them until they start killing us. Then we've got to start looking, oh yeah, the kid is going too far. Sorry. Anyway, that's enough for me.
No, you're right. Well, it ties in well with the fourth topic today. It's to do with the police seeking wider powers to tackle the ice epidemic, Ethan.
Yeah, thanks, Jono. And this relates almost perfectly to it. This, again, as I mentioned last week, is the same tactic of using real issues disguised as a barrier to pass a certain agenda. And it's being used a lot more as of late, especially with all the terrorism hysteria on the rise. So let me read out an article by the Courier Mail from just over a week ago entitled, "Police Seek Wider Powers to Tackle ICE Epidemic." Quote, "Police across Australia want the power to strip search people who are not under arrest in a desperate bid to identify ICE users and dealers. The Police Federation of Australia, which represents the nation's 59,000 officers, has formally told federal MPs the police are coming into contact with crystal methamphetamine users regularly and current search laws are too restrictive. The request comes as evidence in submissions to a Senate inquiry into the drug reveals the frightening speed with which the scourge is spreading. Leading researchers say there is even an anecdotal evidence of young people turning to ice as a cheaper alternative to alcohol. The Abbott government has pledged to crack down on the drug and help frontline service workers who are being hammered by violent and erratic users." So just reading this out, you can see that it's all just emotional rhetoric that's just based on trying to pump this up without even looking at what is actually being done here. So I'll continue on. FPA Chief Executive Mark Burgess said the federal law changes and new programs were needed to make the job safer for police. Quote, "A review of the legislation in respect to searches to persons in police custody, strip searches, as well as the potential to search persons not under arrest would be a welcome recommendation," he told the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Law Enforcement Inquiry. "A strip search can only be carried out at the moment if the person has been under arrest and charged or if the magistrate has made an order," end quote. Now, the article goes on, it continues, it's quite a long one. It goes on to talk about the ice epidemic and add statistics, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a couple of points that need to be addressed here. And number one is the fact that they are using, as I mentioned, real issues that are questionably increasing as a result of television and advertisement, I would believe, to disguise a blatant disregard for civil liberties. It's disgusting. And second, let me read out the opening sentence of that article again. "Police across Australia want the power to strip search people who are not under arrest." You haven't even committed a crime or have been arrested. I mean, this, John, if people are willing to submit to these proposals with articles like this that put the agenda straight at the top and then just go on with all of this emotional rhetoric, it really does make you analyze just how trained the TV has made the general populace.
Well, we were fortunate enough last week to have as a guest General Maddox, and he spent some time talking about the Hegelian dialectic, the problem, reaction, solution paradigm that they have. And here it couldn't be more obvious. Hey, the problem is we've got this ice epidemic and the police need more powers to deal with it.
Yeah.
The reaction is, well, we don't want an ice epidemic. That sounds bad for us. It could harm our kids. I mean, I don't do ice, but it sounds pretty scary. You know, what do you need? More powers? Well, here's the solution. we'll just give the police more powers. Hey, nice and simple, Lindsay.
No. And last week I said you'd be reading my mind, and that was what I was going to say. It just reminded me straight away. Oh yeah, look, we've got this terrible problem. The police need power. Oh, come and strip search me before you arrest me. Yeah, wonderful. And obviously that's how they're doing it all the time. If people could start to register these little things, it's not this is not a one-off. It's happening all the time, and they're gradually becoming, well, we can do whatever we want. We don't have to arrest you. You don't have to have done anything wrong. We'll just do whatever we want to you because we're the police. Anyway, I'll leave that.
But that's what it is. And it couldn't be more obvious to me. And I think once you get used to analysing the news in this way, saying, hold on, what's the motive here? What's the agenda? What am I supposed to be reading between the lines? It's so obvious what you're looking at. But to the average person who still thinks the news is here to help them, that the newspapers, might tell a few fibs here and there, but generally are here to help us and to inform us. So that average person who sees it that way, they're probably not going to read it the same way that we read it because they're not in that mindset, Ethan.
Yeah, that's right, Johnno, and that's why we have a show like this to go through and dissect all of this propaganda and read between the lines, because as you can see in this article, they've just combined a whole bunch of emotional rhetoric to try and get the people in, as General Maddox detailed from his article on realnewsaustralia.com, the Hegelian dialectic in full effect. And they introduced the power to strip search individuals during the G20 under extreme certain laws to protect some of the world's so-called leaders that were here for the G20, and we were a part of that. We could be strip searched on the spot. They had all of these laws, and that was taking it to an extreme. People were outraged about it, but they accepted it because of terror threats, heightened fear, because it was such a select occasion that it had to be introduced. And now the same thing is happening right here because of the ice epidemic, which, in my personal opinion, it's increased because they are allowing it to increase through television and advertisements, and through these campaigns, they're actually increasing it because there's an agenda behind the drug trade in this country as well. But that's my personal opinion. But they're using it, the epidemic itself, to mask that this disgusting strip of civil liberties in this country. And this is something that we need to do every week on this show, is look through the news, break it down, and try to get it out there, Johnno.
Yeah, like I said, I think most of our listeners probably are fully aware that the newspapers and the rest of the mainstream media just simply act as the propaganda arm of the overall ruling structure. You've got your politicians, and people think of them as being the government, but they're not really. They're just, even if you think they're real and legitimate, they're just individual people who go to Canberra, a few times a month or whatever. You know what I mean? They're not really people who run the show. The people who run the show, the newspapers serve as their information arm, their propaganda arm, whatever. And most of the masses, they lap this nonsense up because they don't know any better. They're not trained to know any better. In fact, they're trained to believe that anyone who questions the news is crazy, which is why the average person listening to this is thinking, hold on, do these guys support the ice epidemic? And I can't speak for Ethan or Lindsay. I'm saying I'm not convinced there is an ice epidemic, but even if I were to be convinced of that, I wouldn't be convinced that somehow making the police more powerful would be a logical solution. The logical solution would be to question why the government's allowed to tell us which drugs we can and can't do in the first place. But most people simply can't see it in those terms. One final segment to do with the police today, topic 5, is to do with an update on an accused police officer, Lindsay.
Okay, thanks for that. Look, this is a combination of two, if I can put it together. They both come from the Courier Mail. One was page 4 on the 8th of August, and the other's page 6 on the 8th of August. And I thought that was quite nice that, they should have them duckily placed near each other. The first one was Stewart is still top of the cops. Now, the police commissioner, Ian Stewart's job tenure will be extended as early as next week, according to this article. Mr. Stewart, appointed in 2012, has consistently said he wants to stay in the job. The government has not explained the delay in his contract extension. So that's the end of that article. And then the other article, a police officer who escaped punishment over the bashing of a young man at a Gold Coast police station is the subject of a new excessive force complaint, while the alleged whistleblower accused of exposing it, that's the bashing in the Gold Coast police station, fights for his career. And I think we've been over this before a couple of times. It absolutely disgusted me. Anyway, the reason I brought this in was that these two articles suggest that we can expect more of the same until it all blows up in their face. That just the idea that there was a group of policemen who bashed this bloke, and one fella came in with a bucket of water to wash the blood away so there'd be no sign of it. And they all got off. I think one or two resigned, and the other ones got off or got off very lightly. And now one of those again has been caught doing it again. And whether they'll be prosecuted or not, I don't know. If the past anything to go by, that there'll be some excuse they can't prosecute that policeman. So then you've got one poor bloke, I think he was a sergeant, who felt really bad about what had taken place and released the video to one of the television channels or maybe a newspaper. And now they're really hounding him into the ground, trying to get rid of him because of his whistleblower activities. They're finding that, oh no, there's got to be a law against that. Now the ones that did the bashing get off, and so now they want Mr. Stewart to come back. Oh, he's the top of the cops. Oh yeah, wonderful. So my point is, we can expect more of this because it's just a rotten, corrupt system, and I don't think it's got any better since they had that big blue when Bianca Peterson was around. It really doesn't seem to have been made that much different. I'll ask, Ethan's been following this sort of stuff for a long time, so I'll ask Ethan if he's got a take on this.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. I like this because it was a perfect rounding out of all of these segments that we were talking about that all relate to each other, and that is that the same system that we're talking about is going to continue on and on. And those two examples right at the end there of the whistleblower that is now having to go through the courts down here around the Southport area at the Gold Coast, and the police commissioner having his contract possibly extended again, it's just a reflection of the system that's going to continue on, and through further militarization, through deceiving, using emotional rhetoric and propaganda to increase their powers, the police state is just continuing to creep. And people don't know, the average person has been trained to normalize this, and it never used to be like this, Johnno. And that's the thing. Most people don't see that it's coming because it's an incremental process where you wake up one day and say, oh, where did this come from? And they're doing it incrementally just like this, and it's through rhetoric and propaganda. And as we can see, the system is not going to change anytime soon, and we need to stay vigilant and address this as often as we can on the show because it is important.
Well, it's worth reiterating here what's happened. So a police officer has leaked footage of some of his workmates bashing the hell out of some person in custody.
Yeah.
He is now at risk of losing his job altogether over what he did, whereas one of the officers who's been accused of police violence is apparently still on the job and facing fresh allegations from other people.
Yep.
And that's the situation that we face today. And I think this is one of those ones, I do follow what people say about these sorts of things on social media. And this is one where it seems like even the sleep will get it.
Yeah.
There's something fundamentally wrong here. Of course, most of the sleeple have never really had to deal with the police in a direct fashion. They've never been under arrest. They've never gone to court to see how the legal system, works at a ground level. So they're pretty far away. They're removed from it in their own lives because they've never dealt with it directly. Of course, we're dealing with it indirectly all the time in so many ways. But for the average person, as long as they're not dealing with it directly, it's not something they think about. And they'd rather believe that the police is a force for good, which will help them when they need it. And yet, when this kind of article does make it to the mainstream media, as it has done, evidently in the Courier Mail, I do see some of the reactions online. Even the sleep will get it. There's something wrong, and it gives me hope. It's a shame that it has to happen this way.
Yeah.
But at least they can see there's something wrong here. Will that translate to any of them ever doing anything about it? Probably not, but we can try to be optimistic, can't we?
Yeah. Can I just one point I'd like to add? I don't think he's just going to lose his job, this whistleblower. I think he could finish up in jail.
He might well do, apparently.
Yeah. That's what worries me. Whereas the other blokes don't even look like getting any sort of punishment whatsoever, and yet he's going to go to jail. So what you say is that everybody can see that this is unjust. Everybody except the police commissioner.
Yeah, well, it says, I'm not sure if I've got the same article as you've got there. This is from the Courier Mail, so this might just be the online version of the one that you had there. Let's see. As Sergeant Flores' career hangs in the balance, the Courier Mail can reveal the identities of the 4 officers connected with the dramatic incident in the basement car park of the Gold Coast's busiest police station. So what we'll do is we'll keep listeners updated as new information comes through the mainstream media. We're relying on them for reporting on this. We're not the ones going down and doing that, whatever. But it will be interesting to see what happens to the person who leaked the footage. And, if this story is all true, because I'm very skeptical about the news in general, but if this story is true, then what great courage from that officer to release the footage. And like I said, at least it's brought some of this to people's attention, because many people would otherwise be completely oblivious. We need to move on to the 6th topic for domestic, and it's to do with something very different, a change of pace: blood extraction from infants. Lindsay.
Thank you. This was in the Courier Mail again. That's my favourite source. My mate Rupert. I'd be absolutely knackered if I didn't have Rupert to get. This is page 19 on the 8th of August. And the headline said, "Screening change on right foot." I think that's a play on words, but anyway. Quote, "Newborn babies could be tested for a range of new illnesses after a nationwide review of screening practices. Day-old babies are currently," and this is the point I wanted to get across, "day-old babies are currently screened for about 25 rare conditions using a sample of blood from their heel. But now the heel prick test is undergoing its own examination, with health officials debating how and whether other diseases should be included." Now, the reason I brought this up is that there was talk about this many, many years ago. If I had any money, I would be prepared to wager it all on the likelihood that they're also doing a DNA test on every child for the future. Now, I don't know whether you feel that way, but no, they're not going to just check for. We've already got this DNA and how wonderful it is. It's almost like the old fingerprint thing, so why wouldn't they be taking a sample of DNA? Anyway, that's my take on it. So, have you got anything to say before we throw it over to Ethan?
I didn't actually realise that they took blood from infants, because of course I've never had children. A lot of these things, until you experience it, how would you know? It was the same with vaccinations. I was oblivious to how many vaccines are forced upon infants until someone brought it to my attention, because how would I have known otherwise? When I first got told how many vaccines, I was like, there can't be that many. So I looked into it. Wow, they're really getting stuffed with this many vaccinations, and so it is with this blood thing. I didn't realise that they took the blood from infants as a matter of routine. So when I saw this in your list of articles this morning, I looked into it, and sure enough, this is quite true. They do this, and of course, they're doing it to screen supposedly for congenital problems and this kind of thing. So on the surface, it seems to make sense. But what are they doing with the blood samples? I'd never thought about it because I didn't know. Ethan, what say you?
Yeah, Johnno, and this was a big story. Last year or the year before, I don't have the exact information in front of me, but there was a big uproar about a lot of people not knowing that there is a massive database in the Pacific region that stores all of this information and all of the blood samples, and they've been doing it since the early 1990s, and a lot of people weren't aware that this was happening because they weren't telling the parents that it was happening. There was no coverage of it, and it caused a lot of uproar. And I don't have the specific information in front of me, but I remember when stories like this broke, because I was also shocked to hear of it, because it affects a lot of people. And there was hundreds of thousands of DNA, blood samples that were just stored in databases, and there was an identity of everyone that had been born, et cetera, and it was all monitored, and it was just this massive story that broke. And this story that Lindsay's brought up today is just a reflection of that. And as you said, John, it's something that looks quite harmless on the surface, always has an agenda behind it. And we know that they want a computerized society where everything is tracked, everything is monitored, everything is stored in databases. And this, even though it looks harmless on the surface, could have a real sinister agenda behind it if it gets into the wrong hands, John.
Well, the point that I'm trying to make here is they already take blood as a matter of routine from infants. And like I said, people like me were oblivious. I'm sure there's lots of other young people out there like me who've never had children, who aren't aware that they're doing that. And it does seem a little bit creepy almost that they can just routinely take the blood from infants. And of course, most people would say, what do you mean it's creepy? This is good because they're screening for diseases and all the rest of it. Because again, anything the government does, especially through the medicine of the government, it must be a good thing. To me, I think, well, taking blood from infants, and this is before the infant has a right to say, you know what, I don't trust the government. I mean, it's an infant. It's got many years before it's even old enough to start to think about these things. And of course, many people never do, even well into adulthood, think about these things. But they've got your blood on record if they want it. And how do we know what they do with the blood once they're finished with it? Where are the checks and balances? I have no idea, because like I said, up until today, I didn't realise I'd taken the blood, Lindsay.
Yeah, no, I agree. And this could explain a couple of other things. There has been a push on for a long time that all mothers should give birth in hospital rather than at home. And that's for health reasons. But you can see that this probably got these other reasons as well. The second thing, it also brings in the implication of the mother testifying, or that's probably not the right word, but when a mother registers the birth, then there's this argument that the child no longer belongs to the parents. It then belongs to the state, who are then looking after it. So, their attitude may be, well, we've got every right to take the blood because it's our child now. That I don't want to get too carried away with this, but you start to wonder the fact that they're taking blood without telling the parents makes you wonder about what's going on behind the scenes.
And again, where are the checks and balances? Now, it might well be the case that those checks and balances exist, and that once they've taken the blood and screened it for diseases or what have you, then they have to destroy the sample. That might well be the case. One would hope that would be the case. I'll have to look further into it and then report back next week. We've got one more article that I'd like to throw in there for domestic before we move on. It's to do with the Australian census going online. I want to read this one out from the ABC again. That's our national broadcaster. A budget of over $1 billion a year, with a B, taken from the taxpayers to pay for this. I want to read out this article. It's entitled Census Goes Digital, 2016 Survey to be delivered online for speed, convenience. And it's from today, or August the 9th, 2015, and I'll quote, "The federal government has revealed the next census will be held on August 9, 2016. But gone may be the days of staying in to be counted on census night. The government expects 2/3 of Australians will complete next year's survey online. It says such a high online completion rate would make Australia a world leader in digital censuses rather, and would mean the 2016 survey becomes one of the biggest online events in Australian history. Government frontbencher Kelly O'Dwyer hopes a new digital focus will make the process simpler and more convenient for respondents. They will be able to complete it on their phone, on their iPad, wherever they've got a mobile device, they'll be able to fill in the survey," she said. "There will be some people, though, we know, who will not be able to fill it in online, and they'll be able to ask for a paper form. But most people, we think, will take up the opportunity to fill it in online. It's pretty much a world first in terms of the number of people who'll be completing an online census, and we think it's a great innovation because it means it's going to be easier for people, and it's also far more environmentally friendly." Australian statistician David Kalish said gone were the days census collectors travelled on camelback. "Over the past 100 years, we have moved from using mechanical adding machines and calculators and census collectors travelling on horse or camelback to transforming our census operations in 2016 to take advantage of today's digital world and connect with citizens in their online environments," he said. "Online login codes will be posted to the majority of households, replacing hand delivery and collection of forms by census field staff. The Australian Bureau of Statistics uses census data along with other data such as information from the registrars of births, deaths and marriages and the Department of Immigration and Border Protection data as the basis for official population estimates, including annual regional population estimates." End quote. Lindsay, had you heard this one?
No, I haven't, no.
What are your first thoughts?
Well, when you were reading that to me, I'm thinking, oh, yes, this is really up to date. And this is a bit like, why would you carry, well, first of all, you don't want to be going around on camels. And why would you carry money in your pocket when you can do it digitally? It's almost the same logic. And
yeah. And if you can get people, I only read this one today, and they've said that the census will be this time next year.
Yeah.
So they've released this. It's the ABC running this article about the government a year before the event in question. But of course, we're free and we live in an open democracy, and, you know, thank God the capitalists beat the communists during the Cold War, Lindsay. You know what I mean? Could you imagine living under a statist apparatchik? Oh, boy, oh, boy. Where was I? Oh, yeah. So
sorry.
It seems to me like they're preconditioning the masses for online voting. Now, I'm not saying that's the whole agenda behind this. I think there's multiple agendas, multiple consequences of what they're doing. But the way you read that article, the way they say, oh, this is going to be so great. Not like the days when you had to use why would they even talk about camels if it wasn't to put in your mind the idea that you're better off with the change? You see what I'm saying? It's classic.
Yeah. Oh, no, that was pathetic.
Who's arguing to... Ethan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting, John. And as you mentioned, There is multiple avenues here, and two stuck out for me, and especially the way that they construct the articles. They use the word camel because automatically in the subconscious of people, they think camel, old-fashioned, old times, we've evolved, and they said, well, we don't want to go back to that system. Whether it's true or not, a singular word in an article has the power to resonate in the minds of the people. That's what I first saw. And then there was just how ridiculous this is, because it's just as Lindsay said with the cashless society. It's the same rhetoric, the same logic behind it that is coming in and making everything digital. Now, digital, they can, who knows what they could do? They could skew results. They could change what people say. If it's an online thing, then it has the same vulnerabilities of everything that is online, and they want people to be dependent on that because they control it. It also affects jobs, people that have to deliver them personally. Now that they can just go online, and people are losing jobs. I know Lindsay has in his agenda about robots to wipe out jobs, and the creeping state of robotics and technology replacing jobs all around the world. That's very important. And it relates to this because there's people losing jobs as well. So as you said, Johnno, there's just so many avenues that they're trying to do with something as simple as this. They can carry out all of these agendas at hand.
And, I make the point oftentimes, you think about it, even though I'm young, in my lifetime, an entire generation of people have grown old and died, and an entire generation of people have been born. So for the people coming through, I remember when I was a child and it was census time, and my father would fill out the census for all of us. I remember as a child saying, "Oh, can I fill out my part?" No, I have to fill it out, because it's exciting. You get to take part. You think it's all great, whatever. So I remember full well the census being a paper-based thing, but for the children coming through now, the census will be entirely online, and it doesn't take that long before you can convince enough of your population that going online for this kind of thing is good. It doesn't take long before going online becomes good for everything. Yeah. And in the live chat, we've got more than 30 people watching live. Thanks for coming out. Mes Manic says that there's that word convenience again. Well, they won't get me, and I'm quite sure they won't get Mes. Unfortunately, they're going to get most people. If most people go along with this, they'll have no problems with it, Ethan.
Yeah, that's right, Johnno. And people are just being programmed into normalizing it. And that's what we need to realize. Listen to voices like Lindsay. There was a time when things were different, and we have been trained through fear and intimidation and propaganda to accept all of these notions, to accept that becoming completely dependent on digital platforms is normal, to completely transform from a society that didn't have militarized police, that didn't have all of these things, that after 9/11, the war on terror and all of this nonsense that came out of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, this heightened fear and sense of dependence on the government as a parent figure, we need to realize that it's not normal. And unfortunately, there's children that are grown up and they don't know a world that has been any different. But I'm sure that our listeners do understand that things were different, and that's why we provide this platform to make people aware that they're not the only ones that remember a time when things weren't like this, and things don't have to be like this if we spread the word, Johnno.
Yeah, and for me, that's one of the motivations of doing this kind of show. I don't, in my mind, believe that the one out like this is going to change the minds of the masses, because the television stations, the newspapers, the radios, and the education system, they all belong to the people who want this, who are ramping this up, who are getting it through. We're just one very small online radio outlet that does a show once a week. But I like to think that the other people out there who see this and are wondering, hold on, how come no one else sees it the way that I do? Well, they can tune into a show like this. They can share it with the people in their life who know about this stuff. There are other people. There's plenty of people out there who can see what's going on. They've just got no way to network or connect. And hopefully more people will start using this kind of online platform to do that. Because if you believe in the lie system that you've been raised in, you think, oh, well, between 7, 9, 10, ABC and SBS, they're bound to cover all different opinions and a cross-section. And it was complete nonsense. They're all talking the same book. ABC and SBS are funded directly by the government. 7, 9, and 10 are regulated by the government. They're controlled by very, very wealthy people who can't wait to see us all chipped and doing everything online and having no real on-the-ground, system of trade or of interaction or what have you. They can't wait for that. 7, 9, 10, ABC, SBS are all on board, but there are people who aren't. We're not. Hopefully many of our listeners aren't. There's one more article I want to chuck in, the 8th topic today, just quickly for domestic, since we've got the time. This one's to do with an anti-same-sex marriage advertisement being silenced. I'll read this one out from 9news.com.au, TV silences traditional marriage group. This is being republished from the AAP, and this is from August 7, 2015, a couple of days ago. Quote, a lobby group has accused the 7 Network and Network 10 of refusing to run their television advertisements which endorse a traditional view of marriage. Interest groups are fighting to sway undecided MPs before a cross-party bill to legalise same-sex marriage is introduced to federal parliament on Tuesday. The Marriage Alliance launched their nationwide multimedia campaign on Monday, highlighting their belief that marriage should be between a man and a woman. The MA claim they have been denied the right to broadcast their concerns that law changes could erode children's and citizens' rights. We are asking for a fair go to have a debate about an issue that should be discussed openly and transparently and without intimidation or fear, said MA spokesperson Sophie York in a statement. Why is public debate being silenced? Meanwhile, Australian Marriage Equality has called the MA's campaign a desperate attempt to reset the timeline on the issue, given the distinct possibility of change. With 72% of Australians now supporting marriage equality after 10 years of robust debate, it's clear the community are no longer buying what they're selling, Deputy Director Ivan Hinton-Teo told AAP. And quote, the article goes on, but the point of the story is that two of our 3 commercial broadcasters are refusing to run the ads of this group, and this group is saying that they want marriage to stay as is, they don't want change.
Yep.
And they're being told you can't run your ads on our network. What do you think of this, Lindsay?
I've got a couple of takes on it. This happened to me once in a country town where the radio station had refused to take an ad from me about something. Exactly the same thing. It was against the manager's policy or whatever. They didn't like what I was going to say. So I went round to the newspaper and I said, I want to run an ad in the newspaper saying that radio station wouldn't accept an ad. And they refused to accept that ad. And I thought, if I ever wanted any more evidence that they're all working in collusion, that was it. It was perfect. They're looking after each other.
Of course.
Yeah. And I suspect that what you just said is the same thing. They're all, somebody from on high has told them what, this is where we're going. I'm not suggesting it's the politicians or whatever. There'll be somebody above that who's saying, we're going for this marriage business, right? So you're going to have to follow the party line in your newspapers. We don't want any of these ads or whatever. And I'm sure in the old days, they used to have something called a D notice, a defence notice, and they could ban things going in the newspaper if they were adverse to Australia's defence. But I'm sure it's further than that now. It's just anything politically incorrect or whatever. And I'm sure that's what it is. I had another article on this about the Labor Party were going to force their people to vote in favour of this legislation as well. We'll do it another day, but it was about the Crimes Act, because it's a crime to try and force politicians to vote in a certain way with a threat. It's a crime, 3 years jail. And these people come out and openly say, we're going to do this, and nobody does anything about it. So anyway, we'll see what Ethan, because I always like Ethan's take on these things, because he's been around a while.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. And that was an interesting story too. Thanks for sharing that. I saw this through the week, and I've looked into the group that were trying to run the advertisement a bit more, and their advertisement, for those who haven't seen it, was an iceberg that had same-sex marriage carved into it, and then it said that there's more beneath the surface. And the group, as I mentioned, I looked into them. They're very big on same-sex marriage. It's a destruction of the family unit. All of these things that we've spoken about here on the show. But for me, the overall message that I got from seeing this was not whether you agree or disagree or what your opinion is or where you stand on it. The thing is that someone's right to advertise and express their opinion as a group, as an established group that is lobbying for a certain message. They're being censored while the other side are allowed to get there. Was the same-sex rallies yesterday in Brisbane. There was thousands of people out there that got mainstream media attention, but the other side of the story don't get the opportunity to do that. And that's what I believe she mentioned in the article. Where is the debate? Why are we being censored? And for me, that is the underlying mechanism here. Why are people at any time, whether I agree or disagree with them, I stand for people and groups being allowed to express their own opinions and their own thoughts. And if we live in a society where another side of the story can't be shown and you can't express your rights in a political correct world that's been destroyed by all of this nonsense, that's my biggest concern. to it. And that's what I got from this story, John, was that people are being suppressed. And anytime someone is being suppressed and not allowed to voice their opinions, that's something that we should all be concerned of.
Well, all I would ask of people is to be consistent. Of course, there's been a few cases in the last few years, one in particular recently in Ireland to do with bakers who refuse to bake cakes for gay couples for their weddings. They say, we don't support that. We don't want to bake you a cake. And then the gay couples or what have you saying, well, then we'll take this matter to the legal authorities or to the media or what have you. And all I would ask of people is to be consistent here. If you think that the bakers should be forced to bake the cake, then how on earth could you argue that the TV stations shouldn't be forced to run these ads? And I would go further and say that you can't logically hold that the bakers should have to bake the cakes, but the TV station shouldn't have to run the ads. Yes. But I think you can logically hold the opposite position, because a baker is just a baker, whereas Channel 7, 9 and 10 have been given monopoly access to the airwaves. So because it's regulated by the government, then if you're willing to believe the government has the right to regulate the airwaves, they should have the right to regulate how those airwaves are used. And I would think the central tenet should be that anyone who's willing to stump up the money to run the ad should be allowed to run the ad. The network shouldn't get to use that as a vehicle for censoring certain notions or ideas. Whereas with a baker, he's just the one who started up his baking shop. You don't like his baking, then don't go to his store. Whereas 7, 9 and 10 have access to our airwaves, and they're getting to decide who can and can't advertise their political positions on it. It's ridiculous. But if you want to believe that it's okay to force the baker to bake the gay cake, if you want to believe that, at least be consistent and see that 7, 9 and 10, under your own line of thinking, should be forced to run these ads. We need to move on to the international segment. And the first topic for today is to do with Spain's draconian new gag laws. Ethan, I know you've got a feature piece for us about this. We were supposed to run it last week, didn't get time, but we'll make sure it's the first item for today. So over to you, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Jono. And now this is something I wanted to speak about for a number of weeks now. And there was an incident last week that was the catalyst to finally include it on the agenda. It has to do with some of the most draconian legislation I've ever seen enacted and how it affects the people of Spain as we speak. Now, I can't avoid a negative tone when I speak about a subject like this, but I do see positives in the situation that I'll speak about in the discussion. But firstly, though, I have an article in front of me from the Telegraph entitled "First Victim of Spain's Gag Law Fined for Criticizing Lazy Police." This is from July 29th. Quote, "The first known individual to fall foul of Spain's controversial new gag law has spoken out against what he sees as the repression of free speech after he received a fine for describing his local police as slackers on Facebook. Eduardo Diaz, a 27-year-old salesman from Tenerife, I believe that's how you pronounce it, told the newspaper El Mundo that the comment he posted on the mayor's Facebook page about the decision to provide the local police force with a new and larger headquarters was just a criticism, not an insult. I get the impression that they are trying to silence the voice of critical citizens," he said. Spain's citizens' safety law come into effect on July 1st after the Conservative Popular Party government used its parliamentary majority to pass the legislation in the face of harsh criticism from other parties and civil society groups. The law allows for fines of up to $600,000 for a variety of public order offences such as unlicensed demonstrations, etc., etc. In his July 22nd Facebook comment, Mr. Diaz criticised the use of public resources on a brand new police station in the town of Guimar, stating that the local police force were a pack of slackers. That's all he did. But local police officers wasted no time in reacting, ringing Mr. Diaz's doorbell 6 hours later to present him with the notification of a fine that was set between $100 and $600. End quote. Now, as always, I'll leave a link at AusRoundtable.com to the article from the Telegraph so you can check it out for yourself. But just to recap, because it's quite an astonishing development here, in Spain, Eduardo Diaz posted that the police in the country are slackers in response to proposals to waste taxpayer money on a larger police headquarters, and 6 hours later they were at his door. Let that sink in for a moment. Now, as bad as this may seem, it's only a small part of what many are calling one of the worst legislative pieces to pass in recent memory. And for those who are unaware with it, I'll leave links at AusRoundtable.com. But I read through the legislation and I've summarized the 10 most ludicrous clauses introduced under the bill. So I'll read it out for you, and I thank the listeners for listening to my voice, but this is important. Number 1 is fines for protesting. Under the new law, anyone who organizes or takes part in a, quote, unauthorized protest could be fined between $30,000 and $600,000 if the protest takes part near institutions such as the Spanish Parliament. Second is disrupting public events. Disrupting public events such as speeches, sports events, or religious ceremonies could face fines between $600,000 and $300,000. 3 is botellón. The Spanish tradition of getting together with mates for an outdoor drinking session looks to be officially over. Drinking in public will be hit with fines of $600 under the new legislation, and teenagers won't escape. Parents will be held responsible for the payment of their offspring's fines. Number 4 is social media activism. Using Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram to call on people to protest will be fined under the new law, and any attempt to put paid advertisements to spontaneous protests will be also fined. Number 5 is photographing police. Police will be fined for individuals will be fined for taking unauthorized photographs of the police, a measure introduced with the argument that being publicly identified could put officers and their families in danger. 6 goes on to talk about marijuana. 7 is something ludicrous as leaving furniture in the street. If you leave furniture in the street, you're going to be fined. 8 is trying to stop an eviction. People trying to stop an eviction from taking place will also be fined because the number of evictions has skyrocketed since the beginning of the economic crisis over there with Greece and whatnot. Number 9 and number 10 are the ones that stuck out to me. Number 9 is not having your ID. If you're asked in Spain to show your ID and you do not have it on you at the time, you will be in trouble under the new law. If they cannot immediately locate it in your home and have failed to report it missing, they are liable to be fined also. Just ridiculous stuff. And number 10 is disrespecting a police officer, showing a, quote, lack of respect to those in uniform or failing to assist security forces in the prevention of public disturbances could also result in a fine. Now, Lindsay, that's only 10 clauses that police are enforcing in Spain. I mean, I don't even have to follow up with any points to speak about this. This legislation, Lindsay, I don't even see how they can justify this in regards to terrorism and violent protest, etc. I think even our government would find it hard to pass, and that's saying something. So you've heard me ramble on there for a minute speaking about this legislation. I'll throw it over to you to get your thoughts on some of these points that I've just read out.
Yeah, okay. I agree entirely with you. It's almost unbelievable that some of this stuff, like disrespecting a police officer and not taking a photograph, and it just goes on and on. I agree with you. The one positive that I feel is that we get Matrix comes on here. Ben, I think, is it Ben? That Matrix.
Yeah, we've had Matrix on.
Yeah. One of the things, he was living in Spain, and he was saying that his feeling was that the Spanish people are not going to put up with this sort of crap. Not talking specifically about this legislation, but things in general. They just won't put up with this sort of garbage. So maybe that's a positive. We're talking about it coming here to Australia as well. People are just absolutely getting sick of this crap. It's getting to the point where you're getting a pushback now. And I think you'll find that the same will happen in Spain. I mean, you can't put furniture on and you can't stop people trying to toss you out of your house or whatever. There's going to be a reaction and possibly violence. And just because you've got legislation doesn't mean that it's going to stop it. If people are that angry, they're not going to worry about a fine. And why would you worry about a $600,000 fine if you've only got $30 in your pocket? It's just this sort of garbage. But anyway, I agree with you. And I'm just wondering whether this is something peculiar to Spain or whether this is the start of a movement throughout Europe. We'll wait and see. But John, have you got any comment on this?
Well, at least in Spain, they're codifying this in law. They're telling you straight up, this is what we can do. In Australia, at least here in Queensland, the police have the right to arrest you under public nuisance laws, which they can use entirely at their discretion. Yeah. So when they say that you can face fines or what have you for not respecting the police, well, that is the case here in Australia as well, but we just don't call it that. We call it public nuisance. which the police can use at their discretion. Ethan, I know that you've witnessed it firsthand, that if people here in this country don't respect the police's authority, they risk being arrested and issued with an infringement notice for public nuisance.
Yeah, Johnno, I have witnessed it and experienced it myself being an activist in this country. It's outrageous, the power that these people think that they have. And the points that really stuck out to me from this legislation in Spain, that's what I was about to speak on, was the similarities. Disrespecting a police officer. We've seen in this country that police think that this is just a catalyst to kidnap people at gunpoint already. So imagine it being the law to do so. The second was social media activism. You know, you can't even call for a protest online without getting a fine. Photographing police without permission. You have to get permission to photograph police. And not having your ID on you can face a fine. It's all ridiculous measures of suppression. And the similarities and to this country, as you said, Johnno, although we don't have it written in law, you know, public nuisance, you can get off that. You can argue that because you say that it was completely unjustified. The problem that we have over in Spain right now is you can't argue that it's unjustified because that is the law. It's actually, you photograph a police officer without their permission. In this country, you can say it's it's completely in my rights to do so, whereas over in Spain, you can't do it. And it's happening right now. And this is real. And, you know, I said that I had a positive spin at the end of it. So I do want to mention that. And the good thing, and this is what as I said, I wanted to end on, is the fact that we now have a precedent to show people where this is heading. This is a global thing. This is similar laws like this is what they want in every single country. And we're not quite there yet. And we can use our freedom, use the juxtapositioning to our advantage and resist these laws before they end up in our own backyard. It doesn't look good for Spain at the moment, but I'm optimistic that Australia still has a chance to turn it around. And I'm certainly optimistic that if only a small % of people in this country wake up to what is really going on around them, we can snowball it. So that was the positive spin I wanted to put there on the end, John, as if it could be a final thought, is that, this is a terrible thing that is happening in Spain now, and you can't try to sugarcoat it in any way. It is a draconian, evil measures that are happening in Spain right now. But the positive is for us and for other people around the world that still have civil liberties that haven't been completely taken away from them. We can use this as a precedent, Johnno, to try and stop it.
Yeah, and we always say that all views presented by guests and panelists are their own and nobody speaks to everybody. So when Ethan says that this is a global problem, I'll leave that to Ethan. I'd rather say that it's worldwide, Lindsay. But we need to move on to this.
Never let a chance go by.
We need to move on to the second topic for international, and that's a piece by you, Lindsay. It has to do with scientists admitting that vaccines can increase the strength of viruses.
Okay, thank you for that. This came off the Science Daily website on the 27th of July this year, and the headline just said that, yes, some vaccines support evolution of more virulent viruses. And I'll just go straight into the quote because it pretty much speaks for itself. Scientific experiments with the herpes virus, such as the one that causes Marek's disease in poultry, have confirmed for the first time the highly controversial theory that some vaccines could allow more virulent versions of a virus to survive, putting the unvaccinated individuals at greater risk of severe illness. Research has important implications for food chain security and food chain economics, as well as for other diseases that affect humans and agricultural animals. The challenge for the future is to identify other vaccines that might also allow more virulent versions of a virus to survive and possibly to become even more harmful, said Andrew Reid, an author of the paper describing the research. When a vaccine works perfectly, as do the childhood vaccines for smallpox, polio, mumps, rubella, and measles, it prevents vaccinated individuals from being sickened by the disease, and it also prevents them from transmitting the viruses to others, Reid said. And can I just put in there that I very much doubt that those things are foolproof, if that's the word. I just can't remember what he said there. But anyway, yeah, it's certain. I think that there are many instances where they get away. We're just not being told that. Anyway, I won't go on too much more. It just says our research demonstrates that another vaccine type allows extremely virulent forms of a virus to survive, like the one of Merrick's disease in poultry, against which the poultry industry is heavily reliant on vaccination for disease control. Now, so you've got a couple of things there. First of all, we all know about sprays on cotton, or just about anything you can do. We know about when we get antibiotics. If it doesn't kill the thing, whatever it's designed to kill, it survives and grows stronger. It's the same happens with sprays on cotton. It's happening everywhere. And now they've finally come out and admitted that the same thing happens with vaccinations. Though he's trying to pretend that, oh yeah, well, the ones that happen in humans, no, it doesn't happen there. Well, why not? That's my first thing. If it's happening everywhere else in all these other fields, why isn't it happening with humans as well? So that I just thought it was interesting, because that's the first chink in their armor that I've come across. Because every other time, everything they say is that it's all foolproof. No, nothing wrong. We all know what we're doing, and just suck it and see. That's pretty much it. So Johnno, have you got a comment on this?
Yeah, I was interested because this was from, was it Science Daily? Was the site that you got this from? And like you said, very rarely do we see articles where they admit some of the problems with what they're doing. So it was refreshing to see this. And a lot of people simply don't understand that there are legitimate dangers and risks associated with vaccinations, the so-called anti-vaxxers. They're not talking about these things for no reason. There's actually some reason behind it. And here we have a science outlet admitting, there are some potential problems, and it's refreshing to see. Over to you there, Ethan. Any thoughts?
Well, we know, Johnno, that the vaccines, the people, I say this all the time, there's a difference between being immunized and being vaccinated. People think that they're the same thing. They don't coexist together. Being vaccinated, we can see, destroys your immune system, and this is just another example of that. And as you said, it's good that it's being reported, but viruses and all of these diseases are allowed to thrive and prosper because of these vaccines destroying your immune system. And it's not just this one, it's all vaccines. They are there because they are disguising real immunity that you can get from catching a virus such as measles or mumps, etc., and it's allowing it to prosper and grow, as I just mentioned. And this is just another example of the dangers that vaccines could have, because the body system is a natural thing. It's a living organism that can fight off viruses and diseases. And sure, there are preventable steps that you can take, such as maybe, there could be possibly vaccines out there that are legitimate and do help you. But as you can see, it's not working with this. And there's a reason that these vaccines are allowing these viruses to grow and to spread throughout the body. And it's because the vaccines harm your natural immune system. And that's something that people need to get through their heads. There's a difference between being immunized and vaccinated. And Lindsay, I thank you for bringing this up, because this is just another example of that.
Yeah, there's not a lot more to add. I was just pleased that we had one instance of it. I'm hoping that if we keep looking, we might find some more where they admit to these chinks in their armor. So there's not much more to add to it. Everybody's heard what I've said there, so we'll leave it go.
And again, we encourage people to check out all the links that we provide at AUSroundtable.com, AusRoundtable.com. We provide the links and bookmark these things. And if anyone ever asks you, why do you believe that so-called vaccinations might actually be doing us damage, well, you should have a list of articles ready to go to share and say, well, don't take my word for it. Here's a science outlet telling you exactly that. Make up your own mind. So check out AusRoundtable.com. We'll provide the links. They should be up there by tomorrow. The third topic for International today ties right in with this. It's to do with a New Zealand health worker being fired for refusing vaccinations, Ethan.
Yeah, thanks, Johnno. It's technically an international story, but it's also an issue that's close to home here, and it's affecting our New Zealand brothers and sisters as of late. So I've got in front of me an article from the New Zealand Herald on August 3rd entitled, "Worker Fired Over Hospital's Hardline Vaccination Policy." Quote, "One worker has now been sacked for defying a new hardline policy forcing unvaccinated Waikato, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that town, Waikato District Health Board staff to get flu jabs or wear masks. A staff member at the DHB has come forward with concern since the Weekend Herald revealed that 3 workers had been suspended and restrictions were in place on a 4th over the newly introduced compulsory measure, which was designed to protect employees and patients from the flu. Waikato DHB, which last month became the first DHB to bring in the policy, has defended the new rules, saying that they have been met with widespread acceptance while lifting staff vaccination rates from 53% last year to more than 75%. The Herald has learned that one staff member's employment was terminated on Friday for refusing to obey the policy. It is understood the worker was not a doctor that works in the main area. One person who spoke on the condition anonymously said that they had protest about the policy, calling it bullying and intimidation. Many staff at DHB are scared as they have either had the flu jab when they usually wouldn't get one, or have been threatened with dismissal if they didn't wear a mask, he said. Another employee said they have seen staff members crying and consumed with rage and frustration while going to be vaccinated. Many have openly stated that they would not be getting the vaccination if they felt they had a choice, but they strongly feel that if they don't have it, they won't be able to do their job, one person said. The worker had seen unvaccinated staff being made to wear masks, even though they were sitting in the back office writing up notes, at least 20 meters from the nearest patient room. Signs had also been up around the hospital stating workers wearing masks were not vaccinated. The employee believed the policy had been a detrimental effect on relationships between patient and caregiver. The Herald understands that although there is nothing in contracts that allow the DHB to order staff to sign to wear masks, the DHB can request this for patient safety and health, end quote. Now, first of all, this is a very good article by the New Zealand Herald, so we have to give credit where it's due. It's great to see real journalism that questions the status quo popping up in the mainstream press. That's always refreshing to see. Now, there's a couple points I wanted to touch base on. The most important was at the end of the article that mentioned there is no clause in employee contracts to make them wear safety masks. So right away, we can see that these workers have every right to refuse the instructions, and I assume this employee did the same after refusing the vaccine originally, and he still ended up getting the sack. The second point is the reality that this is beginning to take shape, not just at home, but around the world. I certainly have hypothesized that the mandatory vaccine debate at the moment is only the beginning of a sinister agenda, and eventually, which has already been announced now in this country, there will be an adult vaccine schedule that will threaten your livelihood if you refuse to abide by it. So to see something like this in the press isn't the best of news, but Johnno, it's great to see at least some resistance taking shape. And if we identify the pathway early enough, as we have, there's a strong possibility that one can turn into many. What do you think about this story?
It wouldn't take that many people starting to put in serious resistance to the system and the way that it operates to make a big change to how they would have to go about doing things, Lindsay.
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of these people are gutless in that they'll stand over you, but when they actually feel embarrassed or threatened themselves, then they tend to back off a bit, you know. Yep. And we just got to take all these Jews we talk about, you know, they stand over people, and we started doing that to these bureaucrats or whatever, they'll start to buckle. We've seen it work. We know it'll work. It's just we've got to be determined and work out how we're going to do it to stand up to them. But no, I agree with you.
Yeah. My limited experience with the police on the ground, face to face, is that it seems as though they're used to people being very passive and not even daring step out of line, whether it's because they think that the police are the good guys and, hey, I don't want to upset the good guys, or whether they're scared of what might happen to them, or whatever the case may be. My experience is they seem to expect that you will defer to them, you'll be deferential, passive, whatever. And the moment that someone genuinely stands up and says, no, I have done nothing wrong, and you can do whatever you want, you're the guy with the gun, but I'm in the right and you're in the wrong, they're not used to that. No. And can you imagine how few people it would take doing that? I'm not suggesting that'll change the whole system overnight or anything like that, but I've seen firsthand the way that someone says, no, I've done nothing wrong here. I'm in the right, you're in the wrong. That's how it is, and nothing you say or do is going to change that. So, that's how it's going to be. I'm not just talking about what they say. I'm talking about even simple things like body language. If someone is used to getting away with standing over others and bullying others, it's amazing how quickly everything changes when someone says, no, that's not how it's going to be. And I think this is a good example, like you say, Ethan, of this is a slightly different example standing up to the authorities when it comes to vaccinations, but it's the same fundamental idea of, well, they're used to people just going along with the agenda. Someone stands up and says, not only am I not going to go along with it, but I know that I'm in the right and you're in the wrong, and how quickly things might change, Ethan.
Yeah, that's right, John, and that's the positive spin that I wanted to take from the article here. You know, obviously the downside is that what we have spoken about before is starting to be introduced into the workplace, and that is an adult vaccine schedule where you have to be vaccinated or you're going to lose your job. And we've seen that there's 3 people suspended, a 4th one's under investigation, and 1 person's been fired at this one health centre because they refused to get vaccinated because of their concerns or whatever it may be. And now the rest of the staff either have to get vaccinated or wear face masks, and that's the downside to it. But the good thing is that these people didn't submit to the authorities that were there that were telling them that they had to do this, you know, and that's something that should be admired. You know, we've got just under 6 months until the new legislation is introduced here to take away family tax benefits, and as I mentioned, this will only lead to further measures once they get it through. So I encourage everyone to please bring this up with family and friends. It's a hot topic, and we can seize that opportunity. Even if you are for vaccines, that is your choice. And this is all about freedom to still have the decision in a world that is censoring our voice quite literally every day. So spread stories like this around. There's more nationwide rallies on September 20th in each capital city in this country. And just be aware of what's going on around you. Take inspiration from these workers that stood defiant, because it only takes a small minority of people. It only takes a small amount of critical mass to make the difference. And the power's on our hands, and the power's in our hands rather, and the people are on the rise, John.
In the live chat, Silver Slave 333 says that if enough people stood up for themselves, then maybe some of the police might question whether they're really on the right side. And my experience is that I believe there are some people in the police forces who are genuinely decent people. They got into the force for the right reasons. They're not inherently bad people just because they're part of what I think is a corrupt institution. And I do like to think that if enough people said, no, we're not going to take this anymore, that there would be members within their ranks who would say, yeah, I agree with the people, and who knows what might happen one day if enough people stood up. Will enough people ever stand up? We don't know. We can only be optimistic, and that's what we try to do sometimes on the show, Lindsay, is be optimistic.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking there about the hospital. If those people said, no, I don't agree, and no, you're not going to sack me because I'm not going to leave. You'll have to get the police or security to move me out, and we'll get that in the paper. You might get a slightly different reaction. So, yeah, anyway, I think we are being positive about that. And I think it's about time we all did stand up a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, even shows like this, we get, 30, 40 people watching live right now, and then you've got maybe 500 or 600 views over the course of the week. And this is only a small show, but even if that number of people started making genuine differences in how they interact with the authorities, even that would start to be a sizable percentage. And then each one of those people have people in their lives they can talk to. And obviously it's not easy to convince your family that the authorities aren't the good guys, but I think it largely depends on how you go about it. If you're just trying to force information in people's throats, they generally don't want to hear it. But simply by being a happy person, somebody that people like being around, then some of your beliefs might start to rub off on them over time. Rather than trying to force it on them, just let them realize, hold on, here's a person who seems like he's more at peace because he doesn't bow down to the government. He doesn't do what they say to do, or at least he tries to reduce the amount that he does it over time. You can have a positive influence on the people around you if you're willing to take the time to do it. And if you lead a life by example. I think one of the problems that a lot of people have is when they learn how corrupt the authorities are, they allow it to turn them into cynical people and into negative people. And you're not going to change anyone's mind if you're cynical or negative, because subconsciously they're thinking, well, if I start thinking the way you do, I'll end up like you. And you seem pretty jaded, cynical, depressed, pessimistic. Why do I want to be like you? Whereas if you present a more happy, outgoing, a mocking attitude really of the authorities and the people who subscribe to the authorities' agenda, that's more likely to have a positive effect. And where I'm going with this is, sure, only, like I said, 36 people watching live right now, a few hundred views for the week. This is only one show, but it's really not about this show. It's about people themselves in their own lives. What are you doing when you're dealing with the authorities? And what are you doing when you're dealing with other people who themselves deal with the authorities? I think you can make a positive difference if you truly try. We need to move on to the fourth topic for international, and it's to do with an Israeli diplomat who wants to maintain German guilt over the Holocaust, Lindsay.
Yeah, thanks for that. I got this off Gilad Atzmon's website, and for people who don't know him, he's an Israeli who is a jazz player, and he's got a lot to say about all things to do with the Holocaust or the Arab-Israeli conflicts, etc. So the article said exactly that. Israeli diplomat maintaining German guilt about the Holocaust helps Israel. And this was on the 31st of July, 2015. Haaretz, I think that's how you pronounce it, Haaretz, which is the Israeli newspaper, reported recently that a spokeswoman for the Israeli embassy in Berlin told Israeli journalists it was in the country's interest to maintain German guilt about the Holocaust, and that it isn't seeking full normalization of relations between the governments. Embassy spokeswoman Adi Farjon made the comments in a closed briefing session with Israeli journalists at the embassy. Excuse me. The Israeli ambassador Yaakov Hadas Handelsman was present for some of the briefing, as were other Israeli workers who don't speak Hebrew. One journalist commented, "It was so awkward. We couldn't believe our ears. We're sitting there eating peanuts, and behind the spokesman, there are two German women sitting there who don't understand a word of Hebrew. And the embassy staff is telling us they're working to preserve the German guilt feelings and that Israel has no interest in normalization of relations between the two countries." Talking to Haaretz, Farjon made the usual distinction between Jews and Goyim. It was an off-the-record conversation, a briefing talk. The way I speak with Israeli journalists is a little different. These things aren't intended to get out. Now, that's the end of the quote. Now, my point was that when I first read this, I went in and I saw on the Haaretz page that exactly what this man was saying. Then last night, when I'm doing this article, the agenda for today's program, I went in there and it's no longer there for viewing. And I thought, well, what a surprise that is. So obviously, this renegade Jew called Gilad Atzmon has blown it open to all those people who are followers of his, and suddenly the Haaretz has had to close it down because it's becoming too public. So that's it. And John, have you got a comment on this? And then we'll go to.
Yeah, and you should make the point that Haaretz is a Jewish publication.
Yeah. It's a major newspaper in Israel.
Yeah, and so basically what we've got here is an admission that they want the German people to continue to feel guilt over what is alleged to have happened 70 years ago because it still benefits them. And I mean, it's obvious to many of us that that's what's going on, but here we have an admission that it's what's going on. And what kind of sane, rational, honest, decent person could support this nonsense? Ethan, what say you?
Yeah, Johnno, and it's just it's a perfect example that exemplifies the way that we know the agenda has been driven to make Germans still feel guilty about what supposedly happened 70 years ago. And this is just a perfect example right in front of us that's been documented by a newspaper in Israel that there is an agenda to do that. And I thank Lindsay for bringing that up, because right there in front of you, you have an admission to prove that there is an agenda behind it, and it relates to everything we've said about them bringing up Nazi Germany, bringing up World War II so many times, even though it's 70 years after these events supposedly happened, and it's just ridiculous. It gets to a point where you there's nothing more that you can expand on, but that's a perfect example right there, John.
Yeah, okay. Well, one of the things when I was looking at it, I wasn't thinking so much of Germany. I know that's what the article's about, but I was just thinking this admission that we don't really want normalization of relations between the nations or the countries. And I thought, well, what other countries do they do this same thing with? You know, and it's this sort of double talk. Even their own journalists, when I read that out, I thought they even seem embarrassed by their own government's behaviour. So when we're talking about Iran and this push on, you know, Obama wants to come to terms with Iran, and the Israeli government's pushing him not to. You think, you know, that says it all. They don't really want to normalise relationships with everybody. They want to have everybody on the back foot all the time. So that was my take on it. But I'll leave it to you, John, if you've got to finish off.
Well, this does tie in nicely with the fifth and final topic for internationals. We might as well move on to that now. It's to do with Holocaust survivors' grandchildren calling for action over inherited trauma.
Yeah. Well, isn't it funny how I keep doing all this Jewish stuff? Yeah, this was from The Guardian, and it was on the 3rd of August. The headline said, Holocaust survivors' grandchildren call for action over inherited trauma. And the quote was, psychological impact of families constantly retelling stories of horrific events endured by relatives, blighting lives of young generations, says campaigner Jean West. Jewish activists in Scotland have started a campaign to support the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors across the world, saying the trauma of the extermination camps continues to haunt the descendants of those who suffered there. Dan Glass, 29, from London, said he heard constant tales of the Holocaust as he grew up, which have deeply affected him into adulthood. All 4 of my grandparents narrowly avoided the gas chamber. Isn't it funny how many narrowly avoided the gas chambers in Auschwitz, and countless of their friends met with this fate. For my father, it was a daily conversation in my teens and early 20s, and even though I very profoundly understood his pain, one day I had to say to him, Dad, I can't talk about this anymore. My father had a whole wall full of books on the subject of the Holocaust. It was all he wanted to talk about. But it was so harrowing for me, end of quote. And my take on this is, I know exactly how they feel. I am also feeling the psychological impact of having to put up with this constant barrage of Holocaust propaganda. Where do I go to collect my payments for life? And that's the end of the story.
So the point of this article, Lindsay, is that there are people who weren't involved in the so-called Holocaust at all. They're the grandchildren of so-called Holocaust survivors, and they're saying that they've still been traumatized and they want further action in regards to that.
And I don't think they specifically say what action, but going on the previous, I think they'd be wanting some sort of compensation. That's my take on it.
Would you believe, and I'll have to double check this, if I can find the link, I'll upload it to AusRoundtable.com so people can see it for themselves, but would you believe that a couple of months ago, I read an article where it was being suggested that the trauma can be passed down genetically? That is, that people involved in the so-called Holocaust could actually pass the trauma down to their offspring genetically. That was being mooted as a possibility. I'll see if I can find the article. If I can, I'll post it to AusRoundtable.com. But could you believe that people would try and make that claim in the first place? Because I can, knowing what kind of claims these people make.
Yeah. And I came across a Jewish man who would have been my age, and he was going on with this stuff. This was years ago when I knew him, and he was going on this about how his mother's trauma and how he had actual physical ailments as a result of this. And and I can believe it perfectly, what's coming up.
Yeah, and I would say to them, if they genuinely feel traumatized by the fact that this happened, and like I think from your article even says that he was raised knowing about it, then your biggest, the person you should be looking at right now is Steven Spielberg, because he's the one who is traumatizing people all over the world with his completely and utterly ridiculous films that are being passed off as fact rather than the blatant fiction that they are. And I've made the point before, I'll make the point again. If people want to know more about this, just check out Spielberg's hoax, Last Days of the Big Lie. If they can pass off these egregious lies about what supposedly happened back in the 1940s in Germany and nearby countries, if they can pass off those lies about that, these people can lie about anything. You better believe that they will lie about anything if you're going to give them money.
It says it all.
Ethan, any comments?
I don't have much to expand, but I like the contrast between the two stories that Lindsay that he read out there, the juxtapositioning there. On one hand, you've got the continuation of German guilt about the Holocaust, how it has to be maintained. And then on the other hand, you have campaigns because people are traumatized from hearing about it so much. I thought that was an interesting contrast there. But I thank Lindsay for bringing up those stories. I don't have much to add, John.
Yeah, I mean, Ethan makes a good point. The contrast there. On the one hand, you've got the Israeli diplomat saying, well, we want people to continue to feel guilty. Then on the other hand, you have a supposed grandchild of a supposed Holocaust survivor saying that they feel traumatized because it keeps being brought up and they keep being told about it. It's incredible. And, 12 months ago, I probably wouldn't have believed it. But now I can easily believe this. Humans have this, if you let them, certain groups of humans have this fascinating tendency to manipulate people for their own ends with almost no shame. No shame, possibly no shame whatsoever. And this kind of stuff is shameless.
And well, actually, I've got another article. We won't discuss it now, but another article in there about wasps, and the way that wasps inject the poison into
Well, I tell you what, that one's been on your agenda for a little while, and we've never found time to cover it. But how about we move to that today? We'll make that the sixth and final topic for international, because we've still got 20 minutes till we wrap up the show, and we might never get another chance. So since we're on the topic, why don't you find that there in your paper?
It's just I feel embarrassed because I keep reading all these stories.
Well, that's all right. Might as well get them out of the way.
Okay.
While you're trying to find your spot there, I should apologise to listeners who can hear the paper rattling in the background. Usually Lindsay broadcasts from his place and I can just mute him when he's rattling his papers, but now he's in the live studio. I can't mute him when he's playing with the paper, so I do apologise for the sound, but you've got the article there for us.
I've got it now, this is it from the Occidental Observer website, and it was on the 15th of October 2013, so it's a while ago. But basically the headline was Verbal Venom, Biological Parallels for Western Pathologies, and it was by Tobias Langdon. And I'll just quote it straight off the bank. Stung out to die. Here's a short and very old wasp. Here's a short and very old word, wasp. Here's a long and very new word, neuroparasitology. Parasitology. Okay. Despite these differences, the two words go together very well. Neuroparasitology is the study of how parasites manipulate the brains of their hosts. Parasitic wasps are expert at this manipulation. For example, some inject paralyzing toxins with their stings and create living larders for their offspring. Mason wasps lay eggs on paralyzed caterpillars, then seal them into brood chambers made of mud. The caterpillars are then eaten alive by the larvae that hatch from the eggs. Parasitic wasps induce this suicidal passivity with minute injections of neurotoxin, because tiny amounts of chemical can have huge effects on nervous systems. The way a caterpillar submits to being eaten alive is both grotesque and fascinating, but then parasitism is one of the most interesting aspects of biology. Like predators, parasites have spontaneously evolved again and again in the animal kingdom. There are parasitic animals, birds, fish, insects, and more. Think of vampire bats, cuckoos, lampreys, mosquitoes, and so on. Each species of parasite exploits some particular aspect of its host biology. Wasps inject toxins that paralyze nerves. Cuckoos lay camouflaged eggs that fool the eyes and brains. But this raises the dangerous idea about Homo sapiens. So why can't predation and parasitism have evolved among those animals known as human beings? Why can't there be predatory or parasitic ideologies, professions, and even races? One answer might be this: there can't be, because that's wicked thing to think, or wicked thing to suggest. It's bigoted, hateful, and racist. But that answer might, in itself, be evidence of the proposition. If parasitism does exist among human beings, it will exploit some particular aspect of our biology. Wasps can easily inject chemicals into the brains of other insects. Human beings can easily inject ideas into the brains of other human beings. They do this using something called language. So words like hate, bigotry, racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, Islamophobia, and so on may be the verbal equivalent of a wasp's neurotoxins. Cheap and effective ways of inducing paralysis in a nutrient-laden host. In Europe, Canada, and Australia, these verbal venoms have legal backing. There are laws against hate speech, and people are imprisoned for expressing opinions. Language and law are aspects of human biology, and both are always manipulating our behavior. So both might, I suggest, be exploited by predators or parasites that wanted to feed on a nutrient-laden society. And that's the end of the quote. And thank you for listening to all that. But it just struck me at the time when I read this, just how true this is. So I'll ask Ethan first, because Ethan's a man of some discernment, and we'll see whether you've got a comment on that.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. I thought that was an interesting article there. I was a bit confused at the start about what was going on, but I see how they put the connections there. And I mentioned it earlier in the show when the article was brought up about the census, and they were speaking about camels, and how one single word is a way that it can fester in the subconscious of the human being, and just with one word can form an opinion. And when you are trained as a journalist, you are told these sorts of things to do. And it's not just journalism. I'm just using this as an example, but in real life, as this article mentioned, language is a powerful thing. The way that people can manipulate the brains of others, the way that people can manipulate it. Just look up the MK Ultra studies in the 1960s and even earlier than that, to look at how people that are in control can manipulate the minds of the people. And language and key words like this have a big part to play in forming opinions of people. You know, the conspiracy theories, anti-Semitism, all of these one singular words that are in the English language have become so powerful. And this article right here puts the connection between using the examples of parasites and how that they do it, and the same sort of neurotoxin connection that happens with language. And I think that this is an interesting article that we'll put at AusRoundtable.com, because it perfectly puts out there, John, the connection between how words and language and manipulation can be used to do these sorts of things.
And we should say, for the benefit of listeners, Lindsay, do you want to repeat who wrote that and where you saw it published?
It was written by Tobias Langdon on the 15th of October 2013.
And you saw it in the Occidental Observer, right? And the Occidental Observer, of course, is run by Kevin P. MacDonald, who wrote 3 books, actually.
Oh,
those
more than that.
Three in particular that he's known for, Those Who Dwell Alone. He wrote about the Jewish diaspora, and he started off being, I don't want to say complimentary of them, but just being objective and not really negative in any way. And it was only over the course of writing the books that he came to notice some particular patterns. And of course, now he's called an anti-Semite, but he is a professor, certainly a lecturer at his university. And he's a very well-spoken, well-presented person. He presents logical arguments on his website. Those who aren't familiar with his work, I recommend they go to our site, AusRoundtable.com, and follow the links, or even better, cut out the middleman. Just look up Kevin P. MacDonald, see what he had to say, read what he had to write, and you might find this article. And of course, as you read out, he was talking about how humans can be parasitical on other humans. It's not quite as obvious or direct as the wasp and being parasitic with mice or whatever, but it's the same basic idea. Some creatures will use the labor of other creatures for their own benefit. And it seems as though there are groups of people out there, and not only Jewish people, it has to be said, there are plenty of people out there who are parasitical against the rest of humanity. And this particular gentleman is just making the point that one group seems to do it more often than others.
I agree. And the point he kept making about was a nutrient rich, like that's what the wasps look after for the what do they say? The grubs or whatever. And it's the same with us. Nearly all the Western societies, that's why all these people are wanting to flood in, whether they be going across to Italy or Greece, or whether they be going across from France to Britain or to Australia. They're coming here because we're pretty nutrient rich. When you think about it, we've got pensions and all sorts of things that we've developed, and it's something to do with our society. And these people all want a part of it. And
you can't blame them on an individual level for doing that. Nor, I think, can you blame any group of people for saying, you know what, here's a group of people who are so poorly led, who are so foolish, so gullible, that we can move in, install a completely fake banking system, and financially enslave these morons. And so long as we keep the TVs telling them how lucky they are, and anyone who questions the financial enslavement is crazy, as long as they keep working, paying us, 40, 50% of their labor just in income tax, the money they keep is all fiat and make-believe in the first place that we devalue every year through inflation. If we can get away with it, we're going to do it. It almost seems to me ridiculously stupid to not think that people would do that if you let them get away with it. And so long as you're working, earning money, paying your tax, keeping your fair currency for yourself, as long as you're doing that, then you are encouraging other people, because you are the nutrient. And we as a society, that's exactly what they are. And the banks in this country today, the big four banks, make profits every year of billions and billions of dollars. They're not creating anything. They're moving the money. They're controlling your money. That's parasitical by definition. And of course they're going to do that. Of course they're going to get away with it. And we're letting them get away with it with each and every passing day where we go and labor and do real work, and we let them take their cut.
I remember reading an article some time ago by this Jewish man in Israel, and I can't recall his name now, but one of the points he made was that huge numbers of people are leaving Israel. They don't want to be there. They want to go back to Germany or Britain or wherever. And the way he described it was that when everybody's on the ball, nobody gets to score a goal. And I thought that pretty much sums it up, isn't it? Because by everybody being on the ball, he meant they were all parasites. So they're not going to be able to parasite each other. So you have to go to the nutrient rich. No, thank you for being so honest. It's sad I can't recall his name. It was a long time ago, and I thought that just summed it up perfectly for me. I said, yeah, they can't live in the same country because parasites can't eat parasites. They've got to have a host.
And can you see what and look, you've met plenty of Jewish people in your time. I've said on the record before, I've met Jewish people. I have Jewish friends who are not the parasites at the top running the banks. In fact, they're down here at our level. They're the ones taking out mortgages like we do. They're the ones being parasited off as well. It just so happens that at the top of this life system and control grid, or at least as far up above as we can see, the same people seem to pop up time and time again. And in Australia, the 4 wealthiest families in Australia, according to the Australian Financial Review, are all Jewish. They make up less than 1% of our population. Now, if you think that's a coincidence, fine. Go back to your TV and your Cheetos and live your dumb life. But if you're smart, you realize these people are working together. That's what they do. And I don't think you can begrudge them that. No. I think if they can work together to get to a position where they can dominate the wealthiest families, or in the United States, 5 out of the 6 largest media companies are completely and obviously controlled by Jewish interests. The one remaining one, it's just a question of whether or not Rupert Murdoch is Jewish, and many people say that he is. So again, if they can work together to get this control, I personally wouldn't say that you would begrudge them. It just bothers me that I'm a white man, that other white men don't realize that we could work together as well, but we've been shamed into not doing that. In fact, we've been trained to believe that if we so much as think about doing that, we're the racists. Now, if that isn't a kind of supremacism on the Jewish part, then I don't know what is, given that they're the ones who control the media. Films like American History X, where they present Edward Norton as a character who makes a lot of very valid points about society the way that it is today, but then he goes and beats up his sister, abuses and insults his mother's boyfriend, ends up getting his brother killed, and he's just a horrible person. That's what they present to young white people through their media. They say, look, what happens if you ever stand up for your people, that means that you're a neo-Nazi who gets tattoos and shaves his head and wants to kill people. You never even think like that. Whereas at the same time, they're working together to control finance and the media and what have you. And it's all there out in the open for anyone who wants to think. The sad reality is, Lindsay, they've trained us not to even do that.
We'll talk about a wasping. No, it's really, isn't it?
It really is.
No.
It really is.
It's completely
like
paralysed us. As a group. And like every group should be working together to look after their own interests. We've got this parliament we think is doing that for us, and they're exactly the opposite. They've all been stung. And we've got nothing. So how we go about it, we've got to be positive about this.
Well, to give you an idea of just how controlled Parliament is, we've got a senator in there from the so-called from a supposedly libertarian group, that Senator David Lanhelm from the Liberal, whatever they called that party, right? But he's supposed to be a libertarian. And I know people from the local university who identify as libertarians who look up to this guy. And yet in the whole time he's been in Parliament, what has he said about the Reserve Bank of Australia? What has he said about what has he said about the monopoly control of money? Has he said anything? So if even the so-called libertarian never speaks out against the monopoly control of money in this country, then just how free or open do you think our so-called democracy is? I mean, once you understand all of this, it's so obvious what's going on. And yet I still know plenty of people who are otherwise intelligent enough, but they're, like you said, they've been stung. They're no longer using their intelligence. They're certainly not working together. They've been trained not to. They've been trained to think that anyone who even talks like you and me, we're the bad guys, even though we're the ones who are at the same level as them in this structure of society. There are people at the top who do think that you're cattle. In fact, we've got books where they pretty much openly state this, and yet they've been trained to get angry at you and me.
And Ethan, I think Ethan's been stung too, haven't you, Ethan?
Oh, absolutely, Lindsay. Going back to this expanded discussion that you've said, it really does. The article really does point out the similarities between it, and it's not till you really sit down and look at it that you can see that and a lot of people have spoken to me previously about this, that it's completely mirrored to the way that parasites infect and the way that their movements happen and the way that they do their things. And it's not until you actually put the connections together that you realize that it's happening to us as well. So it's very interesting.
It certainly is. Well, we have come towards the end of the program, so we'll have to wrap it up now. And since you're the one on the Google Hangouts today, Ethan, we'll give you the first round of final thoughts. Any final thoughts for the official upload? Of course, we do go to the after show as soon as we wrap up the official show, but for the official upload. Any final thoughts for episode 44?
Just want to thank everyone for tuning in. I'll leave all the links at ausroundtable.com for you to see all of the information that I've spoken about today, especially the Spain's Gag Laws. I'll leave all the information there for people to find out. Just want to thank people for tuning in, and I look forward to a big show next week, which you can find out more information during the week. We'll upload a promo video, but always a pleasure to be here and speak with you, gentlemen, and I'll see you next week.
Good stuff, mate. And Lindsay, you've joined us in the live studio for the second week in a row. It's always good to have you on board. Yeah. If I knew you were coming, I would have tidied the place up a little bit. It's been a big weekend. But
I'm used to living in a mess.
No, it's not. I wouldn't call it a mess, but it could have been a little bit tidier. But other than that, it's been good to have you on board. Any final thoughts for the official upload for episode 44?
Almost exactly what Ethan said. Thank you very much for listening, for all those people who are listening. If there's anything that you think we can do better, by all means, let us know. We're trying to develop. Johnno's been talking about this in the past. Compared to when we first started, we seem to be better now. I'm sure there's a long way for us to go. That's pretty much what I've got to say. I'll leave it up to you now.
Live listeners, don't take off just yet. There will be an after show. But final thoughts from me for episode 44. As always, all the information that we cite, we try to provide links and also extra material for people to do their own research at ausroundtable.com. That's AWSroundtable.com. There's no ads there. There's no donation button. It's just the articles that we cite from during the show, plus some extra resources that people might want to check out. And of course, the thing about trying to find the truth, whatever it may be, is that you have to seek it out. You have to do your own research. You can't rely on any one person, any group of people to tell you what the truth is. They're just other people like you. We're just other people like you. We're not going to be right about everything. We're not going to know everything. You've got to do your own research. So we try to provide some resources for you to do that at our website. There's also a comment section where you can recommend resources for us. So if you think there's a topic that we're not covering enough or not covering in the right depth, or that we might even be wrong about, let us know through the comment section at our website, or get in touch with us privately. We've got an email address, australianroundtable@gmail.com. And you can contact us on YouTube through the messages facility there. So there's plenty of ways to get in touch with us if you choose to do so. And we encourage it. We welcome it. We're bound to be wrong about some things. The easiest way to correct us is to let us know. Get us in touch with the resources that you're using for your information. Check out the resources that we provide for ours. Like I said, that's ausroundtable.com. Check it out. I want to thank everyone for tuning in live. We've had almost 40 people during the show, Lindsay. We appreciate all of them coming out and doing that. And we get about 100 downloads. It depends on the week, between 100 and 200 from the Podbean account as well during the week. And I want to say a big thanks to everyone who does that as well. We take the time to upload these as MP3 files to our Podbean. You can download them for free. We recommend and encourage people to do that because you never know when YouTube might try and put the screws on us. So if they ever do, it'd be good that if you're familiar with our MP3 facility, that you can just start listening to us in MP3. We usually get those files up by about the evening time the next day, which is about morning time Monday for people in North America. But that's enough for me. Thanks to everyone for tuning in, either live or on delay, for episode 44 of the ARP on the 9th of August, 2015. We're going to wrap it up now. Stick around for the after show, but if you're listening to the live show, hope you have a good week, and we'll see you at 3 p.m. Brisbane time next week.